All right, so in this week's Parsha, in the beginning, we read about the story of Korach and the group of people that joined them in the argument against Moshe. And the Torah says, Vayikach Korach, Korach took himself aside, and it explains in the Midrashim that he came to argue with Moshe, and Rashi brings it down as well. And one of the examples, one of the arguments that he had, that Rashi brings down, was from tzitzis. And he challenged Moshe and asked him a question. He said as follows. He said, if you have a talis that is entirely made out of tcheles. Tcheles is the bluish color that we have one string in the tzitzis. The Torah indicates has to be tcheles. So he said, what would happen if you have an entire talis at tcheles, that is tcheles? Do you still need to have a tcheles string, or you don't need to anymore? So Moshe answered that you do. And Korach mocked him and said, it makes no sense. Because if you have an entire if you have a talis that's made out of wool, for example, and one string of tcheles exempts it from the obligation, already is poiter, which means exempts him from the idea of having tcheles. When you have an entire garment that's made out of tcheles, he says, Lo kol sheken, how much more so, he said. So therefore, he was trying to say that when we're dealing with an entire congregation, that we are all holy, we are all the same. Why do we need to have someone who is distinguished to be like the Moshe, the leader, or Aaron, the high priest? He was trying to say we're all the same. We don't need to have all these positions of importance. So he was basically trying to diminish Moshe's position. That was the question that he posed to Moshe. And the second one was regarding a house that's full of Sfarim. If it's filled with holy books, if it still needs a mezuzah at the door. So here we're going to analyze this argument about tzitzis. So in Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe explains what is this machlekes, what was going on here in this argument between Korach and Moshe, and what is the connection with the kahuna, the priesthood of Aaron? Because we know that the whole idea was he was bothered that Aaron was appointed Kohen Gadol, and he was also bothered about another cousin that was appointed as the head of the tribe of Kehos. So the reason he brings the idea of tzitzis is because it says in the future, when Mashiach will come, the Leviim will be Kohanim. Now the Leviim, it's explained that their source comes from Gvura, severity. And the Kohen is connected to Chesed, to kindness. And the reason why when Mashiach will come, the Leviim will be Kohanim, it's because at that time we're going to see how the level of Gvura, of severity, will overpower Chesed, kindness. So right now, if you look at the Seder Hishtalshelus, which means the chain of descent, the order of things, so when you look at the various levels, just as it is with our emotions, Chesed comes first, and then comes Gvura. So Chesed seems to be higher than Gvura. So this is now. But it seems to be that when Mashiach will come, Gvura will be above Chesed, and therefore the Leviim, which they are connected to Gvura, will become Kohanim and overpower the concept of Chesed. So then Gvura is going to be the Iker, the main thing, and the Chasodim, the kindness, the concept of Chesed, will be secondary, which in Hebrew is called Tafel. Okay, so it seems to be that when Mashiach will come, Gvura is going to play a more serious role, or a more important role than Chesed. And therefore, Korach was trying to achieve that now. He was trying to bring us now, or at least then, when he lived, to the reality of how the world would be like when Mashiach comes. And he was trying to put Gvura on the center stage. And therefore, Korach, who was the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kehas, the son of Levi, and the Leviim they represent the level of Gvura. So therefore, he went disputing against the Kehuna, the priesthood of Aaron, because Aaron is Chesed, And as we know, it says in many places in Kabbalah that the Kohen is known as Isha Chesed, a person of kindness. That's why when it came to determining tzoras, only the Kohen was one who could determine it, because he represents kindness. So he was trying to overtake, and he says, I deserve that position. Because he was trying to say, ultimately, Gvura, when Mashiach will come, will be at the top. And therefore, it should not be Aaron the Kohen, I should be the Kohen Gadol, from Shevet Levi. And based on this, we can begin to appreciate what was his claim about the talis. That he asked, if you have a garment, a talis, which is entirely made out of tcheles, does it need still a blue string or not? So it explains as follows. Tcheles represents gevura. Different than the white. White represents chesed. And tcheles is connected to gevura. So, therefore, he thought always that gvura is the main thing. According to him, gvura is supposed to take over and overpower chesed. Chesed should be secondary. And therefore he said that if you have a garment made out of tcheles, you no longer need the strings of the tzitzis. The strings represent hashpa, which means they represent when a person teaches something, for example, whenever there is a hashpa where you are providing for someone else, so that is the concept of chesed, right? And the strings that hang from the garment represents the flow of chesed, that you're not just onto yourself for yourself, but you're also passing it on to others. So that's what the strings represent. So therefore, because the strings are connected to chesed, so he was trying to say, maybe you can have a situation where you have a garment that's entirely made out of tcheles, which represents gvura, and you no longer need chesed. You don't need those strings. And then it says, and even the strings of tcheles, which we explained that tcheles is connected to gvura. So why would he say, if you have a garment made out of tcheles, you should no longer need the tcheles string? According to you, if tcheles represents gvura and you want to have gvura, so you should have the strings of tcheles. But the reason why he was trying to avoid also the strings of tcheles is because the gvura that we find in the strings of the tzitzis, particularly in the tcheles one, represents oir hachesed bikli hagvura, which means represents the light, the energy of chesed, the way it is dressed in a vessel of gevura, of severity. But generally speaking, the strings are chesed. So the string of tcheles is chesed, how chesed is dressed in gvura. Why? Because the string in general represents the idea of the hamshacha, that you're drawing down from one level to the next, which is the idea of chesed. But when it comes through gvura, when it's dressed within the vessels of gvura, so then you have chesed shebe gvura. And this is explained in Kabbalah and Chassidus, that the energy of Hashem dresses itself within kelim, within vessels, which means that they are contained, they are limited to be able to function in a specific way. That's how the energy of Hashem works. So generally speaking, the energy finds a vessel that is similar, that is of the same nature of the energy itself. So the light of chesed is dressed in a kli, in a vessel of chesed as well, that can adjust and identify very well with chesed and limit it in a way that the recipients will be able to receive it. Okay, so you have the energy of chesed, it finds a kli of chesed. As we're learning in the Tanya these days, the words of Hashem, of the Ten Commandments, are the kli that limit the energy of Hashem. That's the vessel that limits the energy of God. When God creates something and it is limited within those words, so that's how we end up with a creation that is finite and limited. So it's because the energy of Hashem comes through a kli, through a vessel. So typically the keli is of the same nature of the energy itself, of the light. But sometimes we have something that is called lights or energies that change their place. In the Kabbalistic language, it's called achlifu duchtayu, which means that they change their spot, their place. And what it means is that sometimes you can have the light of chesed going through a kli, a vessel of gvura. And when that happens, it creates also a tzimtzum, a contraction. It limits the light even more than if the vessel was a vessel of chesed. Because the whole purpose of the tzimtzum, of the contraction, is for what? It's to be able to have the hashpah, meaning that you're trying to teach something, for example. So the ultimate goal is that the student should be able to understand it. So if you're a brilliant or very knowledgeable person and you try to convey all that information, you're going to overwhelm the student. He's not going to be able to understand it. So when you say, let me restrict the information, let me see how much I'm not going to teach, and you put aside your knowledge, which is the idea of the tzimtzum, the contraction that you make before you teach, so that's actually, in a sense, chesed. It's kindness. Because without it, you wouldn't be able to understand anything. So it seems like gevura, that you're holding back, a restriction. But really what you're doing is you're limiting the information so you could provide chesed. So the student will be able to understand. So if you look at it this way, the concept of gevura, which is the vessel, is really chesed, right? Because the purpose of the kli, of the vessel, is to allow the energy, the light, which is a chesed, to shine through.
Otherwise you couldn't exist.
Right. And this applies, just as in the example of a teacher and a student, that's the process of creation, that Hashem limits the energy so we can have, which, as we learned in today's Tanya again, this is the whole idea of Or HaMemale Kol Almin, the energy of God that fills the world, which means that fits within the worlds and it adjusts according to each creature to make sure that each one receives exactly what he needs. So a human being, for example, has a certain level of tzimtzum, contraction, but the energy that we have, it seems to be greater than that of an inanimate object, like a stone, for example. So at the end of the day, when you look at the whole idea, we see that the whole idea of the hashpah is chesed, and the gvura is what allows that hashpah, what allows that information or that energy to descend, and we should be able to receive it. So therefore, Korach thought that a talis that's entirely made out of gvura no longer needs the tcheles strings. In other words, he thought that we can have strictly gvura. He said, let me be smarter. If gvura is ultimately chesed, so let's stop fooling ourselves. Let's admit it, and let's reveal gvura the way it is. Right? And let's view it as chesed. That's what he wanted to do. And that's why he said, we don't need Arin. We don't need Arin, which represents chesed. Let's appoint a Levi, which represents gvura in its fullest intensity. And let's view it, let's recognize that it is essentially chesed, kindness.
Korach was the Levi?
Yes. So, it concludes in that Hasidic discourse in Likutei Torah from the Alter Rebbe that the truth of the matter is that he made a mistake, and he uses an expression that comes from the prophet Yeshayahu, that he says, Shago baroye, he made a mistake with in his point of view, in what he saw. And it's compared to a person who is inebriated, that he sees something, but he thinks he sees one thing, but he's really seeing something else. So over here also he's saying that Korach thought that we should give more importance to chesed, to gvura over chesed, right? He said, let's just put aside the whole idea of chesed because gvura is really chesed. And he wanted to turn gvura into the primary force while chesed should be secondary. That was a big mistake that he made. And it was quite an obvious mistake. Why? Because for the world to be able to run based on this thinking, based on gvura, to make Gvura the Iker, the main idea here, it is not possible today, but it is only possible after a person concludes the Birurin, which means the refinement of the world. What's the idea of refining the world? Is to separate good from evil and to elevate it to Kedusha, meaning you take the holy potential that exists in everything and you elevate it to Kedusha, to holiness. So then, what happens when a person finishes the process of refining the world? Even the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, which comes from the level of Gvura as well, severity, and we know that from Gvura is that Gvura is what creates the possibility for the opposite of good in the world. Because Gvura holds back and limits the energy of God, and we do not see evidently the energy of Hashem. So then, the more contractions you have, which come from Gvura, the more you limit Hashem's presence, the more you give the possibility for people down here to imagine, God forbid, that there is no God, or to conduct themselves in a way that's considered against hepechatov, against that which is good, against what Hashem intended. So all of that comes from Gvura, and the Yetzer Hara itself, the evil inclination, is also the concept of Gvura, to conceal from you the truth. And only then, when we finish refining the world, then the Yetzer Hara himself will be transformed to Tov, to goodness. And everything will be Tov Me'oid, which is the way Hashem created the world, and He says that He saw everything created was very good. That was the intention. But that's going to be only once we finish our purpose. What happens now? He says, now it's different. When we're still working to achieve this goal, so from Gvura also, in as much as Gvura allows for us to receive the energy of Hashem, which is the concept of the Chesed within Gvura, but Gvura also creates the possibility for what's known as the Enika Lachitzonim, which means that we are allowing for the external forces to also nourish and gain, charge themselves. They're fueled from that holy energy of Hashem. Because of Gvura, because you're restricting Hashem's light, and you create a situation that Hashem's presence is not so evident, that's what allows for the Chitzonim, the external forces, to also be able to gain. In other words, they're called external forces because they are forces outside of the borders of Kedusha, of holiness. And therefore, nowadays, because Gvura, it's like this double-edged sword. On the one hand, it helps us to receive the Chesed of Hashem, but at the same time, it can also enable or provide a possibility for the Chitzonius, the external forces, to also receive that. And therefore, nowadays, the Iker, the main idea nowadays is Chesed, kindness. We're not yet ready for the full extent of Gvura, and Gvura needs to remain secondary to Chesed, and that's why, practically speaking, the halacha is that even a talis that is entirely made out of tcheles, which represents Gvura, still needs to have the strings of the tzitzis, which represents Chesed. Because it cannot have Gvura alone, we need to have Chesed. And Chesed is the primary way of serving Hashem in general. Chesed is the primary force rather than Gvura. This is how it is today. So basically the answer is that, yes, what he envisioned is true, but we're not ready yet for a full manifestation of that reality. We have to wait for Mashiach. We have to wait for the refinement of the world. Because until then, Gvura also presents a problem. The problem that he fuels the chitzainim, the external forces. The other side. In Hebrew it's called the sitra achra. So therefore, we're not ready yet for Gvura to operate alone. And we need chesed. And Gvura has to be secondary, has to be if you can say, but subservient to chesed. It has to be beneath chesed. Now, in addition to the fact that Korach, which was from Shevet Levi, which represents Gvura, he was trying to convince the people that you don't need to have strings, the chutin, which represent chesed, and the tzitzis, you don't have to have the strings. That was what he was trying to achieve. He also had a problem in general with the whole idea of the strings of the tzitzis. Why? Because the strings of the tzitzis represent a revelation of Hashem's energy that is very diminished. As opposed to the talis itself, the talis, the garment itself, represents a great revelation of Hashem's light. So in the garment itself represents a greater revelation of the light.
How can this be? The garment itself you can throw out. The tzitzis have to be buried or undone.
I'm sorry?
The tzitzis have to be buried, cut, or taken off unless you undo them. But the garment, the talis itself can go in the garbage.
Yeah, but it means it's what it represents. It represents the garment.
Without
represents
the tzitzis, it has no meaning.
Yeah, but without the garment, you don't need tzitzis. So
Right.
but the garment is the main idea. The tzitzis is what you add to the garment. So the garment represents a greater revelation of the light, whereas the tzitzis, which is a fine string, represents just a very limited energy. That's why in Hebrew, whenever you're dealing with a very limited energy of Hashem, it's called a kav, a line, right? Which is represented in this tzitzis, which is just one string. And this is also similar to the idea that the Levim, because they represent Gvura, they had to remove the hair from their bodies. The Torah says they have to remove the hair. Why? Because the Levim represent Gvura, and Gvura is the idea of Tzimtzum and Helem, contraction and concealment. And therefore, they don't need the concept of hair, which hair represents, similar to the tzitzis, represents a fine and limited revelation of chesed. Every revelation is chesed. And that's what we find in the hair, it's a part of your body, but the vitality that exists in the hair is very limited. And this is the reason why when you cut your hair, you don't feel any pain. Because the chayus, the vitality you have there, it's almost none. And so too, when we talk about the concept of hair, in Hebrew is se'arot, when we talk about that concept in Chassidus, usually we are referring to an extremely limited revelation, an extremely limited energy of Hashem. And therefore, just as Levim didn't have any hair, which represents a very limited revelation of chesed,
That was only when serving, right? When they were serving, they could.
Right. And therefore, he said also, I don't need that level. He was trying to avoid that level of kindness, which is also the idea of tzitzis, the strings of the tzitzis. Because according to his opinion, he believed that to have a limited revelation is not good. You don't need a limited revelation of chesed. And that's why Moshe replied to him that this is the way Hashem decided, that in order for us to be able to receive a revelation from above in a way that should be revealed down here, which in other words we are talking about the infinite light of Hashem, to be able to express itself in this finite world. So for that, it would be impossible unless it goes through the idea of the strings or the hair specifically, which means that you have to limit the energy of Hashem to the point that he's an extremely limited light, and only then he can illuminate down here. And if not so, so this lower world will not be able to contain and to absorb that divine energy of Hashem. So Korach was trying to reach a level that we're going to be at when Mashiach comes. That you're going to have a massive revelation which comes from Gevura. And that's why actually the word Gevura, we always relate it to restriction and holding back. But more than restraint, really, what is the meaning of the word Gevura? Strength. Because when you uncover how Gevura is also Chesed, really, so then the Chesed is a much stronger Chesed. It's overwhelming. Like the Gevura, the strength, it's overpowering. And Korach was trying to get to that right now. And Moshe said, it's interesting, yes, but not now. We're not ready for it. Right now, we need to bring God's energy into the world. And the way to do it is the way Hashem decided, which is that it has to be specifically through a very limited revelation of Hashem's energy. But according to this would only explain why Korach, which was a Levi and represents Gevura, and he wanted to turn Gevura into the main player today, he made a mistake. But we understand where he was coming from. But the question is, in addition to arguing against Aaron's position, which was the priest, he also argued and disputed Moshe's position as the king, as the melech. And we know that a melech also represents the concept of Gevura, strength, right? A melech rules from a position of Gevura, of strength. And that's how he gains his authority. So the question is, Korach should have really supported Moshe. If what he's trying to bring about is a reality where Gevura is the main player, so fine, you have a good claim against Aaron, which represents Chesed. But why Moshe? Why did he also dispute Moshe's position as the king, as the leader of the Jewish people, when Moshe really represents Gevura, so he should be happy with him? And we also have to understand, regarding what we just discussed, that he complained against Moshe, and he claimed that a talis that it's entirely made out of tcheles no longer needs strings. So, even if the garment would have been entirely white, as the tzitzis that we wear, the talis that we wear, so then, according to him, also, a white garment also should not have the strings, because still the garment represents all the strings represent the concept of a very limited light of Hashem, which is the idea of Chesed. And he was trying to do away with that. So from his position, what difference does it make what color the garment was? From his position, the idea of tzitzis, of strings, which represent Chesed, it's something that he wanted to abolish, he wanted to get rid of. And he wanted the divine energy of Hashem to be able to come to the world directly through Gevura. So why does he have to go into the fact that if you have a garment that's entirely made out of tcheles? You don't need to. You have a problem essentially with the strings, which represent Chesed regardless of the color of the garment. So, to understand this, we have to look into a more general, a broader explanation that is discussed in many places about what was the real claim of Korach. Korach complained and said, Ki kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim. The entire congregation, everyone is holy. And therefore, after that introduction, after that statement, it says, because everyone is holy, Madua tisnasu al kiyal Hashem, why would you take a position of leadership over the Jewish people? So what was Korach's claim really? It wasn't so much from the fact that Moshe and Aaron became Nesim, became leaders. And the fact of the matter is that many of the 250 people that joined Korach in this argument, they themselves were leaders They were Nesiim themselves. As it says, they were Nesiei Edom. It says clearly that they were Nesiim. That's why he chose them. And therefore, to say that Korach opposed the idea of leadership makes no sense. Because these people were already leaders. So what was bothering Korach really? So it is explained that what bothered Korach was not the fact that you need to have leaders, but specifically they have leaders in matters that concern Kedusha, holy matters. For example, Aaron. By Aaron, the Torah says clearly that he was chosen a Kohen, and he was separated to become holy, right? And he was the one that was able to approach the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and no one else. And that's what bothered Korach, and he said, Ki kol ha'edo kulam kedoshim. The entire congregation is kedoshim, is holy. And therefore, when it comes to running the nation, I understand you need a leader, and everyone has to follow one person, the instructions of one king. But when it comes to Kedusha, to holiness, why do we have to create an exclusive position that only the Kohen Gadol can enter those places? If you're all holy, don't we all have the same neshama? Why can we all be holy and we don't need an Aaron? So his problem was not that he was egotistically looking for a position of power, but actually what bothered him was that he felt that we are restricting Kedusha and giving access only to specific people, to select individuals, and the rest of the nation depends on them. He says, why? We are all holy. We should all be able to do it.
Wasn't it clear to him that everything that comes in terms of the structure comes from Hashem through Moses? It wasn't clear that Aaron was appointed because Hashem decided that way?
So it says elsewhere that the Rabbi once explained in a talk this concept that the whole complaint of Korach, if you look in the Parshas, it comes immediately after the story of the spies. And the reason why is, it's not by coincidence, is because when this whole story broke out, Korach had an epiphany, he realized that, wait a minute. The spies wanted to stay in the desert because they wanted to serve Hashem spiritually. They were trying to avoid entering the land. And then Hashem punishes them because obviously, as much as they wanted to serve God, as it says in the world of thought, intention, rather than action, Hashem says that's not the way. Action is what ultimately brings the presence of Hashem to the world, as we learned about it last week. So Korach says, wait a minute. Until now I never disputed Moshe and Aaron because I thought that when it comes to holiness, the thought, the intention is the most important thing. And we figured that Moshe and Aaron, perhaps their intention could be greater, could surpass any of our kavanas, any of our intent, when we do a mitzvah. But now that Hashem is indicating that the most important thing is not the intent, but the action, so he says when it comes to action, we are all equal. And that's why he said, Ki kol ha'edo kulam kedoshim, we are all equally holy. Until now, I thought, yes, Moshe's actions could be greater. Why? Because it's based on kavanah, on the intention. But now I see from Hashem that what counts is not the intention, is the action.
Are you saying
So they said, wait a second, if that's the case, kol ha'edo kulam kedoshim, the entire congregation should be equally holy then. Because there's no difference in the way you put on tefillin and the way I put on tefillin. So, in a way, that whole story is what brought him to this realization that we're not very different. And if Hashem considers the action the determining factor, so then why should you be the chosen individual? We're all the same, so we don't need you. Our actions are all the same. Why do we need a Kohen Gadol? Why can anyone walk into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and do the services? That was his claim. So specifically when it came to holiness, and it was based on the fact that because it is only natural to accept that certain people should be greater than others, should be more spiritually in tune with Hashem. So they accepted that, and they never challenged that concept. But the moment they see that what counts is really the action, they say, 1 second, in other words, he's telling us that we are equal when it comes to holiness. And that's the way we read that statement. Ki kol ha'ida kulam k'deishin. The entire congregation is holy. Why is it that only now you wake up and say the entire congregation is holy? Well, because Hashem just indicated so, by saying that He really cares about the action. And in the action, there's no difference between one and the other.
And yet not going to Moshe for clarification also shows that he never really believed in Moshe's leadership.
Obviously, there's a simple aspect of the story, which was he was jealous and he was challenging Moshe. Well, Rashi says that he saw greatness coming from him, and he saw the Shmuel the prophet, who was one of his descendants. So he believed that that he was supposed to come directly from him,
Right.
and that's why he was looking for that position. And it says that he had deep inside, it was L'Shem Shamayim. He did it for the sake of heaven. He wasn't just trying to make an argument or cause troubles. He believed that really was the right thing to do.
Right.
Okay, let's stop here. We'll continue tomorrow.
Yasher Koach.